There are reports of Joseph Smith meeting the angel Moroni, digging up these tablets. There are signed affidavits from 11 human beings, by name, I can't give their names, but they're in Mormon history, who swear that they saw those gold tablets. These are documents that are signed. So, according to this recent historical evidence and the existence of a huge body of believers who have adopted the historical fact of this meeting on Mount Palmyra, Mount Shadora, or in Palmyra, New York, historically, did the angel Moroni exist?
I see no good evidence that he did, and I'm intrigued by the fact that when cross-examined by a court, not one of the 11, but one of the original 3 witnesses, was questioned very hard by the attorney investigating and asked, "Did you really see the tablets?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And the attorney said, "Did you see them the way you can see me now?" And the witness said, well, no, they were under a cloth. I saw them with the eye of faith." There are serious holes in the testimony of the witnesses to Joseph Smith's golden tablets. And I think it's a very reasonable historical comment to make that this is not good testimony.
Oh, are we out of time? Or
no, it's final question, but you've still got enough for one more question.
Well, then, admitting that human beings, even in the modern enlightened times of the 19th century, have a propensity then to make up or misinterpret like those 11 witnesses did, admitting that they have this propensity to stretch the truth, and you admit that the early Christians were not exempt. In fact, they were less sophisticated than we, although they weren't stupider, they were just as smart as we. You admit that those early Christians were not exempt from those tendencies. How can you fault those of us who examine the documents critically for applying the same standard of judgment to the first century as we are applying to this, the angel Moroni?
I can't fault you for applying critical standards at all. That's precisely what I want to be done. And my claim is that when you do apply those critical standards, the New Testament stands up, broadly speaking, considerably better. So we're not disagreeing, we're not disagreeing about this in principle. What we're disagreeing about is the practicalities of working it out. There may not be many things which a large majority of historians agree about, but they agree that Jesus was a real person in the early 1st century in Galilee and Judea. I hope I've shown you in very brief some of the things that the consensus historians actually does bring forward. They agree that Jesus believed in the dawning intervention of God in history, which he called the coming of the kingdom of God, that he believed he was in some sense his Father's ultimate messenger, that he believed himself to be, and was believed by others to be, an exorcist and miracle worker, that he preached God's undeserved forgiveness, that he was a critic of the religious establishment of his own day and was killed for it, and that he believed his death would have something to do with God's redeeming activity, and that his own mission was to the people of Israel only, but, and this I think is less certain, that at a later stage his work would be carried to a wide world. As an alternative to this, Dan, as self-confessed and cheerful amateur, who doesn't like the idea that only the paid professionals should have a go at this, and I have no problems with amateurs having a go at this either. Dan suggests, number one, there is no external confirmation for the events of the New Testament. My response is there's some. It isn't much, but there is some, and there's about as much as I think I would expect. That is to say, Jesus was a minor prophetic figure in Galilee on the very edges, on the margins of the Roman Empire. And Roman historians aren't likely to have taken much notice of things that went on in Galilee. Philo of Alexandria was not in any sense an historian. He was a speculative philosophical theologian, and he did not investigate events that went on in Judea. That is simply incorrect. I know the book that Dan got it from. He references it in his book, and it's a book written in 1909 and published in Freethought Press. I'm not persuaded this man read Philo either. Finally, the template that Dan put forward as an alternative explanation for why Christians came to believe things about Jesus, suggesting that he's a purely mythological figure, seems to me not to be genuinely there. The template is far more likely to be a myth than Jesus is.
Okay, it's a good challenge. I'm going to read Philo, finally.
It's hard work.
I know some of the passages that I have read, you know, not being a paid professional historian, are tough going, and I appreciate the kind of work you people have to do, and it's amazing the kind of scholarship you have. It doesn't take much intelligence, though, to realize that on many issues the experts disagree with each other on many things. Chris gave us examples of where they do agree, but notice that the examples he gave where scholars, he claims, do agree with each other, have nothing to do with the actual legitimacy or historicity of the original person named Jesus. They have to do with what was said. So, yeah, there is some coherence in what was said. I agree that there is a remarkable agreement among the Gospels about the crucifixion story. You can't find much in there that's different. So if something happened, if we're going to say there's a likelihood of something happening in the New Testament story, the crucifixion is probably higher than the resurrection. The resurrection, of course, being internally contradictory. And I looked at one of the attempts to try to write a coherent narrative, which I think begs the question, weakens. I think if nothing else has been done tonight, Chris has shown some of you literalists, fundamentalists, that there is a lower likelihood of reliability of the New Testament that you may have thought because of the honest scholarship of people like Chris and other scholars who admit there are discrepancies that we have trouble explaining, the birth narratives and so on. There are discrepancies in the resurrection accounts. He doesn't think the confidence lowers to a low enough level to round it off to myth. I do. That's my opinion. But even if Jesus Christ did exist, the later stories that were written, even if Josephus did report about Jesus, he was not a contemporary. He would not have been reporting first-hand testimony. And so, yeah, Justin Martyr was not a historian. But neither were Paul, Mark, or John. John admits that his work is propaganda. He exaggerates and he says, even if you wrote down all the events of the life of Jesus, they couldn't fill a room with the book. Well, of course, that's untrue. That's exaggeration. And he said, but these were written that you might believe. No historian says, I'm writing you this so that you might believe. He has an axe to grind. He has an agenda. He has a religious mission. If Justin Martyr should be discounted or his reliability lessened, then we should apply the same critical standards to the writers of the New Testament.